go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to this Morpheus Tech Brief. I'm Martez Reed, Director of Technical Marketing. And in this tech brief, we're going to walk through building a Morpheus integration. So just do want to provide a quick overview of the Morpheus platform itself, which will certainly provide some context as it relates to what we're looking to go through in today's session. So the Morpheus platform provides value for service providers and large organizations in the ability to be able to carry out use cases such as infrastructure provisioning, so automating and orchestrating the end-to-end deployment of workloads, both on-prem as well as in the public cloud, ability to be able to integrate with clusters, Kubernetes clusters via provision, things like AKS, EKS, GKE, as well as being able to support the Morpheus platform's MKS Kubernetes distribution included at the box, and then being able to tap into brownfield or existing Kubernetes clusters. Platform does include automation capabilities that are leveraged during the provisioning of workloads as well as the decommissioning and then day two. Platform also includes the ability to be able to run those on a scheduled basis or as part of a self-service catalog within the Morpheus platform. So certainly provides a lot of capability from an automation perspective. Then the last two, I typically lump together, cloud visibility and cloud optimization. So the platform provides the ability to be able to integrate into various hypervisors on-prem, as well as into public clouds such as AWS, Azure, and GCP. And then once the platform has integrated, being able to discover the various assets and resources in those cloud environments, and then being able to provide things like guidance recommendations and other optimization capabilities within the Morpheus platform. So that being said, let's delve into the topic for today's session. Really, the focus is on building out that Morpheus integration. And so what that means is leveraging the platform's plugin framework or architecture to extend the Morpheus platform beyond the out-of-the-box capabilities. And so certainly we've had a number of tech briefs that have covered various aspects or facets of the plugin framework, such as the ability to be able to create instance UI tabs, custom reports, and a handful of others. So really the focus for today's session is to bring all of those pieces together, leveraging the Morpheus plugin architecture. And so platform does include 90 plus integrations out of the box. And so how can we create our own custom integration that provides a robust capability? So we're going to walk through a number of the providers that are available within the plugin architecture, some that I'd imagine many may be already aware of, as well as some new ones that have been introduced in recent versions of the Morpheus platform. So we're going to start off with generic integration, which is a really exciting capability that has been added in the latest release of the Morpheus platform and the plugin architecture to be able to provide an integration similar to those that are native to the Morpheus platform. We're going to expand upon that as we go, be able to tie into things like instance UI tabs, custom reports, custom analytics, custom alarms, custom automation tasks, and then finally guidance recommendations within the Morpheus platform. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is the generic integration provider within the Morpheus platform. One thing that I do want to call out is that plugins do support the ability to be able to add multiple providers to a single plugin. And so what that means is that we can think about plugins more broadly than just a report plugin or an automation task plugin. It's a plugin that is providing a capability that can have multiple providers. So in the example that we'll walk through, this particular plugin has multiple providers that encompass all the various facets of capability. So in this case, we have the plugin. The core capability that we're going to walk through is that generic integration. The generic integration provider provides the ability for me to be able to add an integration of a custom type within the Morpheus platform. So this was available within the 1.1.6 release of the plugin architecture. What this provides is the ability to be able to create that custom integration within the Morpheus platform, but allows me to be able to extend that in many ways within the Morpheus platform. So being able to add things like a custom UI page for the integration allows me to be able to bring in data into the Morpheus platform and then be able to expose that via that UI page. And then the custom integration or generic integration does run on a schedule. So that allows me to be able to reach out to an external system to be able to pull in information, on a routine schedule or even do some maintenance operations as part of the integration within my given solution to be able to leverage that. So let's take a look at that, how that looks within the Morpheus platform really quickly. So under administration, integrations, we have the ability to be able to add a new integration within the Morpheus platform. So certainly we see the ones that are included out of the box, whether it be Puppet, Ansible Tower, Power DNS, all the various others. So in this case, what I'm showcasing is the ability to be able to tie the Morpheus platform from an integration perspective into Puppet Enterprise in this particular situation. Could be any third-party system, doesn't even have to integrate with an external system, could be a fully embedded mechanism within the Morpheus platform in which you're performing various operations that in integration within the platform provides value. So in this case, we'll go down to, and we see other. In this case, we have Puppet Enterprise listed for this particular integration that has been added into the platform. So what I'm now presented with is a list of option types or inputs that I can provide information for this particular integration. So these are fully customizable. The only things that are included out of the box would be things like name and enabled. All of these others are fully customizable in terms of how they're presented as far as the configuration for this particular integration. So in this case, we have various option types that are added. So I can see things like leveraging credentials, access token, specifying various ports that the integration is going to communicate, in this case, with my Puppet Enterprise server, as well as additional configuration for things like caching in this particular example. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like on the back end from a code perspective. Certainly, I'm not going to delve into all of the specifics from an integration standpoint, how that is built out, but do want to highlight a few key aspects of how that is pulled together. And so we'll start with the abstract generic integration provider. In this case, it's the generic integration provider that has been added, as I mentioned, in that 1.1.6 version of the plugin framework that provides this capability for me to be able to add in a custom integration within the Morpheus platform. So we see things like the category, which is what we saw when we went to add the integration. We saw it was under other, specifying the icon that should be presented once the integration is being added. We do see things like the refresh. So in this case, what I mentioned was that ability to be able to leverage the sync schedule, which by default runs every 10 minutes. And so I can define custom code that is going to be executed every 10 minutes. In this case, I'm reaching out to the Puppet Enterprise server, pulling back data that I'm then going to be used for caching that information or some of the various other aspects of this plugin, so that every time a capability within the plugin needs to be leveraged, something like an option list or a UI tab, I don't have to reach out to the Puppet Enterprise server for every call. In this case, I can reference the Morpheus database for that information, and we'll talk through some of the specifics about how that's actually facilitated via the Morpheus database. So I'll skip past the refresh section for now, and let's take a look at those option types that we saw. So this is where I'm defining the various option types, things like the URL, whether to ignore SSL verification, credentials, all the things that you see on that integration page, I'm defining via those option types within this particular integration of the Morpheus platform. And so that provides me that ability to be able to take the user input, and as part of the integration being configured, let's take a look at an existing integration to see how that looks. I've specified the pieces of information for the integration, and I can define that here within the integration. The benefit that this allows over and above the previous capability within the plugin architecture, which was the plugin settings. So the plugin settings were associated with the plugin. That was at a global level. What this offers is the ability for me to be able to define or instantiate multiple reference points, in which, in this case, I might have multiple Puppet Enterprise servers in my environment that I want to integrate within the Morpheus platform. So I'm no longer tied to just a single configuration with the plugin settings that are tied to the overall plugin, but now I can define multiple integrations within the Morpheus platform that can then be referenced independent of one another. So I've specified the various integration configuration. Additionally, do want to take a look at how that is referenced. So as an example, we have things like the credentials, we have the various ports. What's actually being done is I am referencing that integration within the code. And so what I'm doing is actually grabbing that configuration for the integration, and it's a JSON payload. So I'm simply parsing that JSON payload, and then I am referencing the field names for those particular values that I want. So things like the access token, the orchestrator port, the DB port, all those things are in that JSON payload. I'm pulling those out, and then I'm then referencing those as part of my code. As an example, I have the access token that I want to pull out of the configured integration and then reference that for authenticating to the Puppet Enterprise server. And we see a number of different references to that as we go on in the code to be able to leverage that functionality. So now that we have an understanding of the general construct of the generic integration, let's take a look at how the integration leverages some of the capabilities of the platform, such as reference data within the plugin architecture. That's a key one that provides a lot of value, particularly for those generic integrations. And so in this case, what I want to do is I want to reach out to the Puppet Enterprise server in this particular example, and I want to pull back information and effectively cache that information in a place in the Morpheus database that is available to me for caching that information. So that's where within the plugin architecture, we see reference data, and I can leverage that capability. So in as the respect to where it's at in the Morpheus database, there is a reference data table within the Morpheus database that data gets populated to within the Morpheus platform. And so as part of those syncing or refreshing of the particular integration that I've defined, I can then store that information in the reference data table of the Morpheus database for use later for things like the option list, the UI tabs, reports, and some of the other various places within the Morpheus platform that I want to present information, but it may not necessarily need to be real time in the sense of I don't need it to be up to date to the second, but within a 10-15 minute window is more than acceptable for a number of use cases, and it reduces the need to make the same number of API calls. And so let's take a look at the database in terms of an example of what that looks like. So we see in this case, I'm in MySQL Workbench, and I have pulled up the reference data table within the Morpheus platform. And so this provides me the ability to be able to, as I said, store data in the Morpheus database in a designated place in which I can then reference it. And certainly we also see a number of other entries prior to the references to Puppet Enterprise of places in which the Morpheus platform itself is storing information relevant to various integrations and capabilities in this particular table. And so what I've done is I've defined those particular entries, and I've specified the configuration as a JSON payload. So in this case, I have specified a number of things that I want to store in the database and pull out. Things like tasks and plans within the Puppet Enterprise platform. So those are for my automation capabilities. Things like the nodes within the Puppet Enterprise server, I want to pull those in, and a number of different things that I can do. So let's take a look at what that looks like within the actual plugin code. So here we have that I'm pulling in what are known as bolt tasks. So essentially those are automation tasks that we'll reference actually later as part of talking about some of the custom automation. But what I want to do is I want to make that API call out to my Puppet Enterprise server to grab the information. In this case, I want to know the names of the tasks that are available for me to execute. We can see that it's pulled back the JSON payload. And then what I'm actually doing is I am creating a block of reference data. And so this is what is populating the database within the Morpheus platform that is storing that information, in this case about the Bolt task, in my Puppet Enterprise server. So we see that there is the reference data, and I'm defining that utilizing the various aspects of account. We see that the code is arbitrary, but having a scheme or a defined mechanism for me to be able to easily store that and then reference that later is really important in terms of how I can ensure that I can get the data in, but also get the data out when I need to reference it, particularly in different places within the plugin framework, such as custom tasks, some of the option providers, option list providers, various other capabilities. I want to ensure that I can get that data out in a manner that allows me to be able to reference the correct data across integrations that might be defined in the platform, as well as across various instances. So in this case, we see that I have grabbed the config output. So this is the payload that I grabbed from Puppet Enterprise, contains the task. I modified the data to just give me a list of only the names and not any additional information, converted that to a JSON payload that is then utilized to populate the config, which is what we see in the database, is that JSON payload that I can then utilize for additional purposes to reference later as part of my integration within the platform. So you see a lot of the powerful capabilities of what this integration could unlock within the Morpheus platform. One of the other things that I do want to touch on is the ability to be able to leverage that integration page within the Morpheus platform. Various integrations within the Morpheus platform provide either no detail or some detail about the integration. That's one of the benefits of the generic integration, is similar to the UI tabs within the Morpheus platform. I have the ability to be able to render the template in terms of the method name for what that actual page looks like. So let's take a look at how it looks in the Morpheus platform, and then let's delve into some of the code to take a look at how we actually define that. So if I click on the integration that I have defined within the Morpheus platform, we see that I now have a page that is the same as the various other integrations within the Morpheus platform. The difference being that I can define this section down here underneath this horizontal line. And so what we see here of summary, nodes, automation, those are all custom sections of this particular integration UI. And so it allows me the ability to be able to define what that looks like within the Morpheus platform to act as a centralized place for visibility into information pulled back from that integration, various other touch points that I could define it to be. So in this case, I've got a quick summary page, listing of the nodes. In this case, the nodes that are defined within Puppet Enterprise. I'm mirroring those up to instances in the Morpheus platform. And then I've got that list of bolt, task, and plans that exist within the Puppet Enterprise platform. So certainly you could define anything that you want from this standpoint. So let's take a look at the code to see a lot of the mechanics of how that is. So for those familiar with creating custom UI tabs within the Morpheus platform, it's the same look and feel as those capabilities of being able to specify things like how the actual template is rendered within the Morpheus platform. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm specifying that I want to do things like parse the integration to be able to grab information from the integration. And so this is where we could do things like we could reach out even via these calls to the external system, or in this case, I've specified that I want to grab those from the existing data within the Morpheus platform. So we see here as an example, I've got the service status of Puppet Enterprise. And what I'm doing is I'm referencing the reference data within the Morpheus platform. So I'm specifying that I want to grab the status based upon the code, and then I'm pulling back that data to be able to parse the information within that JSON payload that I defined to be able to say, I want to specify, in this case, with the service status, what I'm actually doing is I'm grabbing the version of Puppet Enterprise that we see here that is being stored in the Morpheus database as part of the scheduled sync. So in this case, the page that we see here is rendered based upon information stored in the database. And every time the page is loaded, I'm not making a call to the Puppet Enterprise server itself, but simply referencing data stored in the Morpheus database. Doing some additional manipulation of the data to be able to specify things like the number of nodes, the status of the nodes that we see down here. So as I said, fully customizable in terms of the look and the feel of that particular section of the Morpheus UI within the integration provider. So we see I'm populating data with the particular integration. So that's how I would define it from a Groovy perspective. Take a quick look at the actual HTML that's being defined for the integration. So it's leveraging the handlebars templating engine. Those that are familiar with the instance tabs and various other UI components within the Morpheus platform. So as I said, just specifying the HTML and what that should look like. So certainly there's the ability to be able to we see it in here, various aspects. Certainly it can be externally referenced, things like adding in CSS to change the look of the presentation, as well as adding in things like JavaScript to do some additional dynamic manipulation of either the data or the presentation that you see on the integration page. So that provides us with immense capabilities as it relates to how we can tie into particularly external systems or leverage the platform to be able to define those new integrations using the generic integration provider within the Morpheus platform. So we also see things like I can refresh. I also have the ability in this case that some of the actual JavaScript that I was defining in my actual file was adding some of these new sections into the action section underneath here. Out of the box, only refresh is available. So I did a little bit of a trickery, so to speak, to add in the new actions that were available. In this case, opening up the Puppet Enterprise console via that actions page. Certainly, there could be a link down here, but I wanted to have it handy in the actions section of the Morpheus UI for this particular integration. So now that we've walked through integrations to get a better sense of how that works utilizing that generic integration provider and some of the capabilities it can provide for us to be able to get data into the Morpheus platform, also providing a mechanism for us to be able to configure multiple integrations within Morpheus. Let's take a look at some of the use cases in which that's being leveraged in this particular plugin. So one of the first ones is that custom UI tab. So for those that are familiar with custom UI tabs and those that aren't, certainly the ability to be able to add a new tab to a Morpheus instances detail page. That provides the ability to be able to expose contextual data from a third-party source or something native to the Morpheus platform to be leveraged. So certainly there's a number of options that we can see based upon even walking through generic integration that provides us a lot of flexibility as it relates to where the data is coming from. Certainly the first option is to reference that external data source on every single API, every single call to the page. So when I load the page, it's going to make an API call to that external system. And every time the page is loaded, it's going to make that API call. Certainly, I can have the option that we see with the reference data capability within the Morpheus platform that instead of making that API call every single time the page is loaded, I could sync that information into Morpheus via that reference data capability and then pull that out of the database each time the instance details page is loaded. A potential third option would be something like referencing an external caching solution or some other mechanism to pull that data. In this case, I am actually leveraging a Redis caching server, which is some of what we saw on that integration configuration page, where I specified that I wanted to have the ability to be able to select whether I wanted to leverage a cache or not. In this case, it provides certainly a number of capabilities of allowing me to offload that work from the Morpheus database. Maybe either the payload's too large or I'm concerned about performance on the Morpheus database. And then maybe I just want to offload it to an external system that I've defined as my caching element within my architecture. Certainly that's a possibility for reference purposes. So with that being said, let's take a look at the custom UI tab integration within this particular plugin. So let's take a look at an instance that has been provisioned. This particular instance is integrated into the Puppet Enterprise environment. So Puppet Enterprise agent has been installed on the system and has been configured. In this case, I will click the Puppet Enterprise tab. So we see some data being pulled back. Certainly this could be cleaned up to look a little prettier and nicer. But it does showcase the capability from the platform's perspective. And one of the other things of particular note is the ability that I talked about with the caching capability. So one of the things that Puppet Enterprise, as well as Puppet open source, does is collect facts about a particular system. So this is the things like the hardware configuration, software configuration from a operating system standpoint that is pulled back into the Puppet Enterprise platform for visibility. So in this particular case, it is quite a large payload. And in this case, I did not want to store that as reference data within the Morpheus platform. So what's actually happening here is I do have a Redis caching server set up that I'm referencing to pull this data out of Redis as part of this particular configuration. So when the page loads, it's actually hitting the Redis cache to pull this information out of the Redis caching server. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like from a plugin integration standpoint. Take a look at source, go to main, Puppet Enterprise. In this case, I have an instance tab provider. So for those that are familiar with instance tabs, similar as we saw with the integration page, we have the render template section in which I'm going to be able to pull back the information and data about whatever it might be, and then present that via the UI component. In this case, what I'm doing is I am going through a couple of different pieces. I am doing things like checking to see if this instance does have associated data within Puppet Enterprise, pulling back that data, fetching the integration. In this case, the instance is tied to the integration, and then starting to go through the process of pulling that back out of the Redis cache. And so this is where we see references to the Redis cache for me to be able to pull that fact data out of the Redis caching server to be able to present that from a UI perspective. One other thing that has been defined on this is the ability to be able to utilize some of the reference data for a particular instance to determine visibility for the instance tab. So the show section of this particular provider is going to determine whether the instance tab is shown or it is not shown for a particular instance. And certainly there's a number of ways that this could be done to provide such a capability. One of the things that I did with this particular plugin is that I wanted to utilize the reference data capability within the plugin architecture to determine the visibility for this particular instance. And so it's actually happening under the covers is that when the instance is loaded, it's going to do a quick query to the Morpheus database to look for this particular entry in the reference data table to determine whether it should be shown or not. And so this begs the question of how is that reference data being populated within the Morpheus database? So we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but at a high level, it's a custom task that has been added to populate that data as part of the provisioning of the workload so that I can then reference that as the instance is loaded to determine should it show, should it not show. So that walks through the custom UI tabs. Certainly there's a number of different places where custom UI tabs are available, whether it be instances, which is what we just looked at. You could do it at the server level. You could do it at the app level. Clusters support custom UI tabs, as well as networks within the Morpheus platform. So a number of places where you can add UI components within the Morpheus platform. Custom reports is another provider that is available within the plugin architecture. In many ways, it's very similar to a lot of the existing concepts and constructs that we've seen with the UI page for the integration, as well as the UI tab for the plugin. So let's take a look at the custom report as part of this particular integration. So this really is showcasing the capability of pulling together these various plugin providers into a single plugin to provide a cohesive experience and capability. In this case, I do have a custom report. There's a Puppet Enterprise Run report. In this case, I have the ability to be able to specify the integration name, as well as what Puppet Enterprise refers to as node groups. So essentially, it's just data being pulled back from the Puppet Enterprise server. That is one of the other pieces of data that is being synced as part of that generic integration. So this is where we start to see all the parts come together of how I can pull that data into the Morpheus platform as part of that reference data mechanism to leverage that across the various different providers that I might want to define for my given integration. In this case, I could spec all nodes, and then I would click run. Do have a existing example that has already been leveraged. So this provides me the ability to be able to display the information via the Morpheus platform. So in this case, this is a custom report that has been defined that is going to simply pull back things like the status of my instances within the Puppet Enterprise configuration. So whether it's changed or unchanged from a configuration drift perspective. Also pull back some data in terms of the runtimes. We can see that they are above various threshold. You can see a table listing of the various workloads or nodes within the Puppet Enterprise configuration. Certainly, it's not to be completely exhaustive from a custom report standpoint, but we do see how all of these pieces start to come together. Let's take a quick look at the report provider for this particular plugin. So in this case, what's being leveraged is an API call to the Puppet Enterprise server. And so we do start to see, once again, some various references to things like looking up the integration to be able to pull back things like the authentication for use, again, in various other places of grabbing the reports from the Puppet Enterprise server. Certainly, this is one of those mechanisms in which I could say, you know what, I don't want to query the Puppet Enterprise server every single time a report is ran. I want to leverage the reference data. But maybe in the case of reports, I do always want to get the most up-to-date data because effectively it becomes that point in time snapshot. So it's not going to be something that's done over and over again. It's simply going to be grab me the very latest, and then that's going to be that picture of what the environment looked like at that given point in time. So doing some additional data manipulation from the standpoint of how I extrapolate the information, and then finally, how it's presented from a platform standpoint. So once again, that render template capability, and then pulling that all together, do see the option types that we had that were exposed, which were things like the integration, as well as the node groups from a Puppet Enterprise perspective. So while we're here, let's take a look at the option sources that are being leveraged as part of this particular plugin. So that's what provides the ability for things like viewing the integrations or taking a look at those node groups. We're also seeing a couple of other places as we go further into some of the other providers. But if we take a look at the particular providers or the option sources here, we can see things like I am querying for the list of account integrations. In this case, the account integration, this refers to the generic integration that we defined, is a type of Puppet Enterprise integration within this particular situation. So that's what allows me to be able to grab those various integrations that have been defined within Morpheus, and then pull that back, and then I can present that to the user as part of defining the report. Additionally, we also see with the node groups, with the node groups, I'm referencing the integrations. So after the user has selected the desired integration, then filter the available node groups based upon that selection, and then now go through the process of grabbing the node groups, Puppet Enterprise node groups, from the reference data table of the Morpheus database, and now present those as a secondary option or a dependent option within the UI as part of building out that report. So that's where the ability to be able to tie those together is starting to be able to be leveraged from a presentation standpoint. So we see the custom report capability within the platform is leveraging many of those pieces that we've taken a look at as far as the integration, how the integration can pull back data into the Morpheus platform to then be leveraged as part of the solution. Another capability that was added in the recent version of the plugin framework is the custom analytics page. And so for those that are familiar with the Morpheus platform, there are reports, which are effectively become those point-in-time snapshots. And then there's an analytics section within the Morpheus platform that provides a more real-time capability of viewing data essentially as it is at that current moment in time. So certainly there's a number of capabilities of where data could be sourced from for this particular situation, whether it be external API calls or via that reference data capability from the Morpheus databases standpoint. Let's take a look at the analytics page within the Morpheus platform. So we see various analytics sections that are native to the Morpheus platform, but we do see a new one under Puppet Enterprise that provides me the ability to be able to load data about, in this case, the existing jobs within the Puppet Enterprise server. So certainly this could take on the capabilities similar to as we see with the various other places in the Morpheus platform of how I present data and how I visualize data. Let's take a look at the analytics provider section of this particular plugin. So you see a number of pieces that are particularly relevant to the analytics provider. So the first one is going to be load data. So this is going to be, how do I get data into the actual analytics provider page? In this case, I do have some static data that is being leveraged, but certainly as we've seen over the other providers, going over the other providers, there's the ability to be able to pull that into the Morpheus platform or reference it from places such as the reference database table. So we see that I have two entries in this case, which is what we saw in the table. And then we have the ability to be able to render template, which is the same as what we saw with the custom reports for that particular provider. So what's actually going to happen that's different with the analytics provider is every time that the page is loaded, what will actually happen is that load data method will be run. So that's what's providing the real-time capability to be able to grab the latest data and present that via the analytics page of the Morpheus platform. Custom alarms within the Morpheus platform. So there is an alarm section within the Morpheus platform, as well as the little bell at the top next to the search section of the Morpheus platform, in which things like the errors would appear there to flag your attention to that. But what this does is allow me to be able to define new types of alarms within the Morpheus platform for whatever various capability that you think makes sense for this particular integration. So in this case, let's take a look at my alarms within the Morpheus platform. So I will click on the little bell at the top to get there extremely fast. But this provides me the ability to be able to customize the alarm that is being displayed. And so in this case, I could do things like acknowledge the alarm as well for the custom alarms, similar to for the existing alarms. So let's take a quick look once again at the code and what that looks like. In this case, I am not referencing an individual provider for the alarms. What I'm actually doing is I'm referencing that in the integration provider. So let's take a look. And so what I'm doing is looking for whether the report status from a node is referred to as unchanged. Essentially what that means is that there's been a configuration drift that has been detected, and I want to generate an alarm for that. So I would define, in this case, this alarm configuration, and I would specify a new operation notification. So that's the mechanism that allows me to be able to surface an alarm within the Morpheus platform to be able to present to whoever the end user might be from the Morpheus perspective. Certainly, there's some additional logic that could be added here to properly correlate and tie the instance in Morpheus to the instance or node in the external system, and then also do things like clear up alarms or clear alarms as they are no longer needed. In this case, a situation would be if the configuration is no longer out of sync from a Puppet Enterprise standpoint, I would then go back and clear the alarm for the particular instance that is no longer out of sync, as an example. Or I would come in and acknowledge it from a user perspective to manually do that. So that provides the alarming capability within the plugin framework of the Morpheus platform. So the next one is custom automation task. So the Morpheus platform includes various automation integrations out of the box, as well as various automation task types within the Morpheus platform. And so as an example, I might want to add in a new task type to the Morpheus platform to interact with an external system. In this case, the external system is Puppet Enterprise, which includes an ad hoc automation capability via what's known as Bolt to be able to execute things that are known as tasks or plans to be able to execute automation. So in this case, I want it to tie it into the Puppet Bolt capability that exists within Puppet Enterprise to be able to leverage that in a way similar to the Morpheus platform's integration with Ansible Tower, now known as Ansible Automation Platform. So let's take a look at what that looks like within the Morpheus platform. So if I come to automation and I click add, I now have two new automation task types, Bolt plan and Bolt task within the Morpheus platform. So in this case, I want to add the new task to the Morpheus platform. So in this case, I select the Bolt task type. I have the results type, which is similar to as with the various other automation types within the Morpheus platform. But the things that I do see that are different are I'm being requested to specify a Puppet Enterprise integration. In this case, I only have one. So this is that same mechanism from an option type and option source that we saw with the custom report, is being able to leverage the defined integrations of the Puppet Enterprise type to be able to present those in the various places that it's valuable from a Morpheus integration standpoint. And then the other thing I do have is Bolt task that we see here. So this is actually being pulled from that reference data as part of the scheduled sync to the Puppet Enterprise platform. So I could go down and select the various types that I wanted to define. And then additionally, I've exposed a Bolt task parameters. In this case, it expects a JSON payload and would be what is used as part of the API call to Puppet Enterprise to trigger this particular action. So let's take a look at an existing task that has been defined. In this case, we have Puppet Enterprise fax task. And what that's doing is actually reaching out to Puppet Enterprise to grab a JSON payload, which is the same JSON payload that we saw when we went to the custom instance and we saw the fax section of the instance tab is being able to pull back that information. Certainly in this case, I could leverage it for all of the various capabilities that the Puppet Bolt function in Puppet Enterprise has, whether it be things like installing packages, restarting servers, all the various capabilities that I could tap into from a Puppet Enterprise perspective. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like from an automation task standpoint. So in the case of the automation task, we have two defined pieces of code, so to speak. One is the provider and one is the service. The provider references the service as part of the actual execution of automation. In this case, let's click on the provider to see what's going on. So the first thing we'll take a look at is that get service. So that is referencing the service from an automation standpoint of when somebody goes to execute the task, what is actually happening on the back end. So that's where it's doing the API call into Puppet Enterprise to perform that operation. A couple of things to note, we do see those option types that we saw as part of the configuration for this particular automation task. So specifying that as part of how it's presented to the user. And we do see reference to the option source, which is the Puppet Enterprise account integrations. And then similarly with the task, we saw the drop down that allowed us to be able to select from the various tasks that are available. In this case, we see the icon of specifying it, and that allows us to be able to present it via the Morpheus UI. Once I've defined a task, that it shows the icon there. So let's take a look at the Bolt task service. So this was what is tied to that task provider. that is going to provide us that mechanism. In this case, the task type of bolt task supports only local execution, because in this case, Morpheus doesn't need to reach out to the particular resource or instance to execute anything, because how it's actually being done is Morpheus is reaching out to Puppet Enterprise. Puppet Enterprise is reaching into that system via its automation mechanism. So certainly a couple of different options of how this could be architected, depending upon the particular task type and how it should work. In this case, it's Morpheus reaching out to the particular external system. So what I'm doing is doing things like grabbing the actual value of the option types that were specified. In this case, I want to grab the integration information for the particular selected integration. So that allows me to be able to do things like authenticate and know where I need to reach out to that system. In this case, I'm actually doing another call to the reference data. The reason for this is that Puppet Enterprise references the instance on its side as the cert name, which ends up being the fully qualified domain name for this particular instance. And so if I were to leverage the instance name as an example from Morpheus, that would be the short name, and the two would not match up, and Puppet Enterprise wouldn't know exactly which node to call or reference. So this is really just used for mapping purposes to align or marry up the two systems together of what does Morpheus natively think this instance's name is, and then what does Puppet Enterprise expect. And so that's what's handling the mapping on the back end, is that mechanism. So certainly something to be aware of as you try to align multiple systems. And certainly there are a number of ways in which to do it or expose that configuration, whether it be that integration setting or some other static mechanism that is consistent and that you know is going to be reliable each and every time. Now that we have that information, what we're doing is we're referencing the API call to reach out to Puppet Enterprise to trigger or execute that task from the Morpheus platform, doing some polling to verify that the job has completed. And then if it hasn't completed within the defined interval, we're going to exit so that it doesn't continue to run in perpetuity. So that provides the mechanism for me to be able to create those custom task types and to be able to reference and integrate from a platform standpoint. The one other thing that I do want to touch on really quickly is that capability that we talked about with defining the reference data. So in this case, I'm referring to it as tagging the node. And so what's really happening is I'm specifying that I want to populate the reference data that we're looking up as part of the deployment of the workload. So when we saw the lookup here of this mapping, question becomes, how does that mapping get defined? And so we're leveraging the custom task capability to be able to do that mapping. So in this case, I am leveraging an automation task. So we take a look at the task itself. So what it has is the integration that I want to add the instance to, and then an add or remove action that I could then leverage for provisioning and subsequently decommissioning of an instance. So that's going to allow me to be able to specify that I want to add or populate that data into the reference table of the Morpheus platform as the instance is being provisioned. In this case, what I'm doing, as I said, I need to marry up the cert name in Puppet Enterprise, which is the FQDN, to the same mechanism in Morpheus. And so what I'm leveraging is the variables that are available of populating that particular FQDN to match that cert name that can then be used for reference purposes to the instance ID in Morpheus. So as part of Morpheus concepts, I can reference the instance ID to perform that lookup of what that mapping needs to be. In a different example, maybe this isn't the FQDN. Maybe it's something very specific to that external system. Maybe it's an external ID. I could then pull that in as part of the deployment of the workload to always be able to reference that without necessarily needing to do an external lookup every single time. And then similarly with the removal, I'm going to pull that out of the database as part of the decommissioning of the workload within the Morpheus platform. And the last one that we'll take a look at is the custom guidance capability within the plugin framework. So the guidance capability within Morpheus platform provides recommendations for things like right size optimization, and a number of other capabilities like removing unattached EBS volumes in AWS as an example. So certainly this was a powerful capability that I could take advantage of not only to present recommendations, but the platform does include the ability to be able to execute automation to remediate various recommendations that have been presented. So the first one, from a use case standpoint, certainly could be something related to security, whether that be cloud security or security at an instance level to tie into an external system like Rapid7, Tenable. Insert your security solution of choice from that perspective. Certainly another one would be aligned with what exists in the Morpheus platform is being able to leverage performance recommendations from external systems, such as things like App Dynamics or Datadog, or even custom defined parameters that you might specify. You know what? I have the data available to me, and I want to generate a recommendation based upon custom logic that I define within the code. So let's take a look at that functionality from a code perspective. But before we do that, let's take a look at the actual recommendation in the Morpheus platform to provide some context. So in this case, we see things like the configuration drift is being marked. Certainly an option here is to have a cost savings. In this case, this is just for demonstration purposes. I could also specify that it's 0. In that there is no actual cost savings associated with this particular recommendation, but it is simply a security recommendation or operational recommendation that does not involve an actual cost or cost savings associated with it. And at which point I could tie that to the various resources that I want to map the particular recommendation to within the Morpheus platform. So let's take a look at Puppet Enterprise. Take a look at the guidance provider within the Morpheus platform. So there's this section as far as discovery. So account discovery is the corollary of guidance within the Morpheus platform. So I have a capability to be able to do things like define the severity, the actual action, all those things that come along with that, whether there's an actual remediation capability associated with this particular recommendation. So that's what's going to define how I present the recommendation from a user standpoint and when it is actually triggered. So the recommendations are going to run on a nightly basis to be able to provide that capability. So in addition to that, let's take a look at the execution. In this case, I'm just simply doing some logging, but this is where you could specify that you want to perform an actual operation or an action. In this case, I could have reached out to Puppet Enterprise to run an automation task to remediate, let's say, the configuration drift. So if you've detected configuration drift, go run Puppet agent on that system to resolve that issue from a configuration standpoint, or reach out to whatever external system might hold that capability from a remediation perspective. So Shelton provides the capability to not only be able to calculate those recommendations either internally to Morpheus or by reaching out to an external system, but then also have an associated action that can be taken with this particular recommendation. So we've walked through a lot of different capabilities within the plugin framework, and we've seen how all of the various providers can be tied into a single plugin, particularly off the back of the capabilities that are now available with the generic integration provider that has been presented within the Morpheus platform, to be able to utilize that as that single integration point, and then reference that for things like the data capabilities that are available via syncing that in from an external system, as well as the ability to be able to define that in multiple instances and not just tied to a single instantiation at a global level via things like the plugin settings of the Morpheus platform. So with that being said, I do appreciate everyone joining and learning more about how to build an integration within the Morpheus platform, leveraging the plugin framework.